Have you noticed how often people say they want a family, but then quietly admit they do not think they can handle it anymore? Have you ever wondered why? In an era of convenience and technology, something as natural as continuing a family line can suddenly feel so difficult, so delayed, or even completely out of reach? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going to talk about a topic that is emotional, practical, and spiritual all at once. On the surface, it looks like economics, stress, health, and culture. Underneath, it also looks like karma, intention, and the invisible atmosphere of a time period. The two main ideas I want to explore are simple. First, the question of children is not only a personal choice, but also a mirror of collective conditions. Second, when the heart-mind becomes restless and fearful, the future narrows, not because fate is cruel, but because causes have been planted that limit what can grow. Let me tell you a story in a way that feels real, because this is not just a theory. This is the kind of subject that lands in your life through people you know, through conversations you overhear, through the quiet admissions people make when they feel safe. There was a couple I once met through a friend of a friend. They were not dramatic people. They were kind, educated, polite, the type of people who carry their anxiety in their shoulders instead of in their words. They had been together for years. They had stable jobs. They had a home that looked like success from the outside, clean and tasteful, a little too quiet. When you sat with them, you could feel they were managing life rather than living it. At dinner, someone asked them the casual question that so many people ask without thinking, "So when will you have kids?" They smiled the way people smile when the question is both ordinary and invasive. They said, "Maybe soon." But later, when the room thinned out and the noise faded, the woman opened the door of truth just a little. She said, "I do not know if I can. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. I am tired all the time. I do not feel safe in the world. I worry about money, about climate, about work, about health, about the future. I look at my life and I think, if I can barely keep myself steady, how do I carry another life?" Her partner nodded. He did not argue. He looked down at his hands and said, "I want a child, but I also feel like I have to become someone else first. I have to be richer, stronger, calmer, more certain. I do not feel ready, and somehow I never feel ready." If you have heard words like these, you know how heavy they are. They are not selfish. They are not shallow. They are a confession of a nervous system that has been running too long without rest. Now, people often stop at the surface explanation. Cost of living is high. Housing is expensive. Work is demanding. Social support is weak. People marry later. Some face fertility issues. All of that is true. But here is the deeper question. Why do these pressures feel so crushing in this era? And why do so many hearts respond by closing rather than opening? This is where wisdom traditions would say, look at the mind of the time. In Buddhist language, a Dharma ending age is not only about external chaos. It is about inner confusion becoming normal. It is about people losing trust in goodness, losing patience with growth, losing the ability to endure discomfort without panic, losing the habit of kindness and replacing it with calculation. When the collective heart-mind shifts, family becomes harder, not because children are a punishment, but because the inner soil becomes thin. And when soil is thin, seeds struggle. Even if you want a garden. One teacher once described it to me like this: in stable times, people can build life on ordinary courage. In unstable times, ordinary courage feels insufficient. So people delay, withdraw, and wait for certainty that never arrives. The tragedy is that life is built through imperfect courage, not perfect certainty. So what are the 3 karmic causes that people talk about in this kind of teaching? Let us approach it gently, because karma is often misunderstood. Karma is not a curse. Karma is not a moral threat. Karma is simply how intention shapes consequence. It is the way repeated choices build momentum, like footsteps making a path through grass. Individually, uncollectively, we walk certain mental paths again and again. And then one day, we look around and say, "Why does my life feel like this?" The answer is rarely one event. The answer is usually a pattern. The first karmic cause is the karma of fear and avoidance. Fear is not just an emotion. Fear is an organizing principle. When fear becomes the leader of the mind, it quietly rearranges your priorities. It makes you value control over connection. It makes you value safety over growth. It makes you value certainty over love. And here is the subtle part. Fear does not always announce itself as fear. Sometimes it appears as being practical. Sometimes it appears as being responsible. Sometimes it appears as being modern and realistic. But if you look closely, you will see the same signature. The mind keeps saying, "Not yet." The mind keeps saying, "I need more." The mind keeps saying, "It is too risky." In some cases, that caution is wise. But when fear becomes a habit, it becomes a karmic cause that narrows your destiny. The mind that practices avoidance becomes skilled at avoiding. The mind that practices delaying becomes skilled at delaying. The mind that practices retreat becomes skilled at retreat. Then, even when conditions improve, the habit remains. The couple I told you about were not just afraid of money or time. They were afraid of loss, because they had seen relationships break. They had seen parents struggle. They had seen the world change too fast. Their fear was not irrational, but it had become a permanent lens. And a permanent lens becomes a prison. In Buddhist practice, fear is met with mindfulness and compassion, not with denial. You do not shame yourself for being afraid. You look at fear and you ask, "What are you trying to protect?" Then you ask an even deeper question. What is the cost of living under your rule? The cost is often a shrinking life, not only childlessness, but also less friendship, less community, less trust, less patience, less warmth. Fear makes the heart contract, and life grows from an open heart. The second karmic cause is the karma of desire without depth, craving without cultivation. This might sound strange, because many people think the problem is that people do not want children. But in reality, many people do want the idea of children. They want the image. They want the meaning. They want the emotional reward. They want the feeling of being part of something larger. But they do not want the daily cultivation that transforms desire into capacity. In every wisdom tradition, there is a difference between wanting and being ready. Readiness is not an achievement badge. Readiness is a cultivated inner quality. It is patience. It is resilience. It is humility. It is the ability to serve without resentment. It is the ability to sacrifice small pleasures for long-term meaning. It is the ability to hold discomfort without becoming cruel. Modern life trains the opposite. It trains speed. It trains stimulation. It trains comparison. It trains the need to be entertained. It trains the need to feel validated. So even people with good hearts sometimes discover they have not cultivated the inner muscles of family life. They have cultivated careers, skills, social media presence, status, self-protection, but not the quiet endurance that parenting asks for. This is not a criticism. It is simply a mirror. If you want a harvest, you cultivate the field. If you want a stable mind, you cultivate the mind. If you want to carry another life, you cultivate the heart. In Buddhist terms, this is why practice is not optional. Practice is not a hobby. Practice is the training that makes you capable of love, that does not collapse under pressure. The couple I met had strong desire for a good life, but their desire was tangled with craving. They wanted everything to feel smooth. They wanted stability before commitment. They wanted certainty before responsibility. They wanted to guarantee the future before stepping into it. That is craving disguised as planning. And craving has karma. It creates a life where you keep negotiating with reality instead of meeting reality. Parenting is reality, not a fantasy. It asks you to meet reality daily, hourly, even minute by minute. Without cultivation, people sense that and they retreat. The third karmic cause is the karma of broken relationships, not only between people, but between people and meaning. This one is huge, and it is rarely discussed honestly. In many older societies, children were not only a personal choice, they were woven into community, ritual, religion, family duty, and shared meaning. Even when life was hard, meaning held people together. Meaning made suffering bearable. Meaning made sacrifice honorable. Meaning gave people a reason to endure. When meaning collapses, suffering feels pointless. Sacrifice feels like exploitation. Commitment feels like a trap. Duty feels like oppression. Then the idea of bringing a child into life feels not just difficult, but absurd. This is why a Dharma ending age is described as a time when people lose faith in virtue and forget the path of cultivation. Not because everyone becomes evil, but because people lose the sense that goodness matters. When goodness feels meaningless, people naturally prioritize comfort and survival. They do not say it out loud. They just live it. This is also why relationships become fragile. People are lonelier. Families are fragmented. Communities are weaker. Trust is low. Dating becomes a market. Marriage becomes a contract between two exhausted individuals rather than a sacred partnership supported by a village. And when the relational web is thin, having children becomes heavier because it is carried by fewer hands. So when teachings warn about a time where families have no descendants, it can be read spiritually and practically. Spiritually, it warns that when compassion declines and wisdom is neglected, life force dims. Practically, it warns that when society becomes isolating, unmeaning becomes shallow, people stop building futures. Now, I can already hear a question forming in your mind. Are you saying childlessness is punishment for bad karma? No, that is not the point. The point is that karma is a pattern. Some people are childless by choice and live deeply meaningful, compassionate lives. Some people want children and cannot have them for reasons beyond control, and their hearts can still be full of love. There is no moral hierarchy here. What we are exploring is the collective pattern and the inner causes that make family life harder for many people at once. Karma is not a weapon to judge others. Karma is a mirror to understand conditions. And here is the most important turning point. Once you see causes, you can plant different causes. So, what does it look like to plant different causes in a time that feels unstable? It begins with the simplest practice, returning to the present moment and training the mind to be steady. A steady mind is fertile. A restless mind is barren, not only in terms of children, but in terms of creativity, kindness, and joy. When the mind is constantly scanning for danger, it cannot also nurture life. This is why meditation is not escapism. It is preparation. It is the training of inner stability. It also begins with repairing relationships, not only romantic relationships, but relationships with parents, siblings, friends, neighbors, community, because humans are not built to raise children alone. And we are not built to endure life alone either. When people feel supported, they become braver. When people feel isolated, they become cautious. Support is an invisible resource. It changes what you believe is possible. The couple I met eventually joined a small community group. Nothing fancy, just regular people meeting, sharing meals, helping each other move apartments, babysitting for one another, talking honestly about stress. Over time, their nervous system softened. They did not suddenly become rich or fearless, but they stopped feeling alone, and that changed everything. Then there's the practice of reclaiming meaning. Meaning is not something you find on the internet. Meaning is cultivated through values and actions. You decide what matters, then you live it daily. In Buddhist terms, meaning grows from the path of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom means seeing clearly, including seeing impermanence. Compassion means responding to life with care rather than indifference. When you truly accept impermanence, you stop demanding guarantees. You stop needing the future to be safe before you love it. You realize that nothing is guaranteed anyway. So the question becomes, what is the most beautiful way to live inside uncertainty? This is where the idea of destiny becomes interesting. People think destiny is what happens to you, but destiny is also the quality of mind you bring to what happens. Two people can face the same instability. One becomes bitter and closed. The other becomes humble and open. The difference is not luck. The difference is cultivation. Now let me tell you another story, because stories make teachings real. There was a man who grew up in a chaotic household. His parents fought constantly. Money was tight. He learned early that love could disappear overnight. When he became an adult, he swore he would never create that kind of life. He became successful. He built a career. He controlled everything he could. He planned his life like a fortress. When he married, he loved his partner, but he also treated love like a risk. He wanted children, but only after the fortress was complete. Each year he set a new condition, a promotion, a bigger savings account, a better house, by calmer season, a more certain world. Years passed. His partner became tired, not angry, just tired. One night she said, "I feel like we are living in a waiting room." That sent him, pierced him, because he realized he had built a life that was technically safe but spiritually hollow. He had been avoiding the very thing that could give his life warmth. He began to practice something small. Each day he would do one act that was not about control, one act of generosity, one act of patience, one act of vulnerability, one honest conversation, one moment of letting things be imperfect. At first it felt unsafe. Then it felt human. Over time, he stopped treating children like a project and started treating life like a relationship with uncertainty, with joy, with fear, with love. He and his partner eventually had a child, but the deeper transformation was not the child. The deeper transformation was that his mind stopped living in the future as a hostage. This is how karmic causes can change, not by force, but by practice. Now, there is also a harsh truth we should face gently. Some people are avoiding children not because they lack love, but because they have inherited unresolved pain. Trauma travels through generations. If you grew up feeling unsafe, You may unconsciously believe you will repeat the pattern. If you grew up being neglected, you may fear you will neglect. If you grew up in poverty, you may fear you will fail financially. If you grew up with emotional chaos, you may fear you will bring chaos into a child's life. These fears are understandable. They are also invitations. In Buddhist practice, we do not pretend the past did not happen. We meet it with compassion. We heal. We cultivate. We take responsibility for breaking cycles. Breaking a cycle is karma. It's changing. It is not a slogan. It is daily work. It is learning to regulate emotions. It is learning to communicate without cruelty. It is learning to apologize. It is learning to be consistent. It is learning to rest. It is learning to accept help. It is learning to forgive without excusing harm. When people do that work, they often discover something surprising. Their fear does not disappear, but it becomes smaller than their love. And that is the real threshold. Not a perfect bank account, not a perfect house, not a perfect world. The real threshold is when love becomes larger than fear. Now let us talk about the spiritual warning in a way that does not turn into superstition. When teachings speak of maitreya and warnings, one way to understand it is as compassionate alarm. A wise figure does not warn to scare you. A wise figure warns to wake you up. The warning is this: if a society becomes obsessed with short-term pleasure, status competition, and self-protection, it will lose the willingness to nurture the next generation, both literally and spiritually. Even if children are born, their hearts may not be nurtured. Even if families exist, their bonds may be thin. So the question becomes bigger than biology. Are we nurturing the future in any form? Are we passing on wisdom, patience, kindness, and courage? Or are we passing on anxiety, distraction, resentment, and numbness? A society can have a high birth rate and still be spiritually childless if it does not transmit wisdom. A society can have a low birth rate and still be spiritually fertile if it transmits compassion and clarity. But when both decline at once, that is when warnings become urgent. This brings us back to judgment, because this subject is easy to turn into blame. People blame young adults for being selfish. Young adults blame older generations for ruining the economy. People blame women. People blame men. People blame culture. People blame politics. But blame is not wisdom. Blame is usually helplessness wearing armor. Wisdom asks, what causes are we planting? And what causes can we plant now? If you are someone who wants children, the practice is not only to worry. The practice is to cultivate steadiness and community. It is to build supportive friendships. It is to heal your wounds. It is to simplify where possible. It is to train patience. It is to treat parenting as a path of practice, not as a lifestyle accessory. If you are someone who does not want children, the practice is still meaningful. The practice is to nurture life in other ways: mentoring, teaching, volunteering, creating art, caring for elders, supporting friends, being a stable presence. In Buddhist terms, nurturing beings is not limited to having your own child. Compassion is wider than blood. And if you are someone who is uncertain, the practice is to look honestly at what is driving the uncertainty. Is it wisdom, or is it fear? Is it discernment, or is it avoidance? Is it a clear recognition of your current limits, or is it a habit of waiting for a life that will never arrive? Here is a reflection that might help. Imagine the future you fear. Then imagine the future you want. Both futures require courage. The only difference is what kind of courage you choose. The courage to open, or the courage to remain closed. Now I want to share something personal in the sense of what I have seen in people around me, because this is where empathy becomes real. I have seen people who desperately wanted children but faced medical barriers. Their grief was deep, but some of them transformed that grief into compassion. They became the kind of adults who showed up for nieces, nephews, students, younger co-workers, neighborhood kids. They became safe elders for people who had none. Watching them taught me that destiny is not a single form. Destiny is the quality of heart you cultivate when life does not match your plan. I have also seen people who avoided children for years because they wanted freedom, and then later realized the freedom they were chasing was actually escape. Not everyone has that realization, and no one has to. But those who did said something similar. They said, "I did not know I was afraid of being needed. I did not know I was afraid of responsibility. I did not know I was afraid of repeating my parents' mistakes. I thought I was just being modern." When they saw the fear, they did not shame themselves. They simply chose a different path. Some had children, some did not. But the important part was that they stopped being unconsciously driven. That is awakening. Awakening is not mystical. Awakening is when you stop being pulled by hidden forces inside you. So what is the heart of the message tonight? The heart is that our era is training fear, craving, and isolation, and those forces make it harder to nurture life. But the path is not hopeless, because karma is not fixed. Karma is momentum. Momentum can change when intention changes, when practice changes, when community changes, when meaning changes. If you want to plant different causes, start small. Speak with more kindness than your irritation wants. Rest more than your anxiety allows. Build relationships that feel safe. Reduce distractions that keep your mind scattered. Practice being present. Practice generosity. Practice patience. Practice honesty. These are not abstract virtues. They are the inner conditions that make life fertile. And if you are living in a season where the idea of children feels impossible, do not turn that into self-hatred. Turn it into inquiry. Ask what your heart needs to feel safe enough to open. Ask what support you can build. Ask what wounds you can heal. Ask what meaning you can reclaim. Even if you never become a parent, you can still become someone who carries wisdom forward. Because the deepest inheritance is not money or name. The deepest inheritance is the quality of mind you transmit to the world. Thank you for being here with me on staying with a subject that touches so many private fears. If you felt seen by this conversation, share your thoughts and your story in the comments. I read them, and the community learns from each other. If you want to support the channel, subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. Your engagement helps this kind of long-form, reflective content reach people who need it. And if you want to go deeper, consider joining as a member so we can keep building a space for practice, wisdom, compassion, and steadiness in a restless time.